Welcome to the 17th of April. Today in history, 3 events for you. It's usually 3, and I've got 3 very varied ones today. So let's crack on and let's try and get this done as quick as we can. Today, in 1875, we have snooker, the invention of the sport. Yes, it's not that old. It's quite recent. How was it invented? Well, there were lots of billiard ball games at this point in time, and snooker is an amalgamation of 2 of them. One of them was called pyramid pool, which is played on a table, much like present-day pool, and that table simply had a triangle of balls, but instead of the spots and stripes that we have today, they were all one color, and people would bet to see who could pot half of them. Well, the other game was black ball pool, where you would have 2 black balls and a bunch of colors, and you would alternate the colors, and then black ball, and you would play against each other, and it was some sort of event like that. It's obvious then that snooker is a combination of black ball pool with the colors and the black and pyramid pool. And so this is the game of snooker. But how on earth was it invented? Well, it was invented today in 1875 in the officers' mess by Neville Chamberlain. Yes, amazing. But no, not that Neville Chamberlain. I don't think he ever did anything so good. This Neville Chamberlain, who was alive at the same time and in fact died 9 years after Neville Chamberlain. I'm pretty sure it's 9 years after, yeah. So he was bored to tears in the officers' mess in southern central India in a place called Uttar, and this is the officers' mess. And he came up with amalgamating black ball pool and pyramid pool to create snooker. Where does the word come from? Not an Indian word as you might think. The word snooker actually came from the Royal Military Academy barracks in Woolwich, where South London, where he had discovered through a new recruit that it was a common term of abuse for new recruits. The word snooker, you're a snooker, means that you're naive, you're green as grass, you're not very good, and you get a lot wrong, and you're pretty hopeless at something. He used to abuse players at his new game for not being very good, and when they missed a shot, he would call them a snooker. And he did this so often that people said, well, we're all snookers at this game because it's new. And the name just kind of stuck. And so there you are. Today, 1875, Sir Neville Chamberlain invents the game of snooker. Moving on, today in 1973, GSG-9 was announced ready for duty. You may not know what GSG-9 is. This image gives it away, though, doesn't it? It is a German special forces and weapons and tactics unit, and you can tell from this picture exactly what it is. Now, unless you play Rainbow Six Siege, you're unlikely to have heard of this team, or unless you know a little bit about history, or perhaps you're a little bit older, or perhaps you're German. I doubt that you know about GSG-9, but in actual fact, they're probably one of the best special forces groups in the world today. And I'll tell you how we know that, apart from being in a computer game. But first of all, let's examine how they were created and how they got to that position. And we have to go back to the 1972 Munich Olympics, where, if you know a little bit of history, you know that a Palestinian terrorist group called Black September kidnapped 11 Israeli athletes and a German policeman at the Munich Olympics. Now, each government, when they host a big event like this, lays out some suspected terrorist scenarios to try and plan and prepare for them should they ever occur. The German government plotted out 26 possible terrorist occurrences for the Munich Olympics. This precise event was scenario 21. So they should have been prepared for it. Sadly not. They were ill-equipped. There is a law in Germany ever since World War II, for fairly obvious reasons, that the military will not be allowed under any circumstances to be used domestically inside the country of Germany against German people. And so the military do not form the Special Tactics Unit today, but there also wasn't one back then. So the job of resolving this hostage situation with Palestinian terrorists and Israeli athletes was handed to the police, who were ill-equipped to deal with this sort of scenario. Now, Black September had demanded, in exchange for the Israeli athletes, that they wanted 234 Palestinian prisoners in Israel to be released, and the 2 members of the Red Army faction in jails in Germany, who were domestic German violent communist terrorists. We might know them better as the Baader-Meinhof gang founder members. So that's what they demanded, and the German government thought, well, we can't give in to that, but we'll pretend to give in. And so they said, yes, we'll lay on some helicopters to take you from the hostage site to the airport where there's a Boeing 737 to await. We've arranged with Israel for the release of these, and you'll meet the Red Army faction members at the airfield as well to prove that this is happening, and then you can release the prisoners. Well, the plan was when the helicopters touched down in the transfer from the helicopters to the Boeing 747, that the police would ambush them and storm them and save everybody. That was the plan. However, the plan didn't work. And in fact, what happened is that when the helicopters landed, the police went through with their plan, but the whole thing was pretty bungled. The German police hostage was shot. 5 of the kidnappers were shot. I think there were 8 of them. But all of the terrorists were killed. All of the athletes were killed as well. So the whole thing was a complete disaster. The only people who survived were 3 of the actual terrorists, and everybody else died. Well, obviously, Germany got a lot of criticism for this, and they had to reflect on things. Within less than a year, they had formed GSG-9, which was going to become their own SWAT, anti-terrorist special forces group. And it was announced today in 1973 by Ulrich Wegener, that the new group, GSG-9, was ready for business. Well, they didn't have to wait long to prove themselves. First of all, this is the website for GSG-9, and it has a little bit of their history. There's no translation page, so I had to work quite hard to discover some of this. In any case, they didn't have to wait long. 73, immediately after 1973, Palestinian terrorists, I think only a few months later, hijacked a Lufthansa jet and demanded the release of the Black September, the 3 Black September terrorists who had been captured at the Munich bungled effort, and succeeded. Germany gave in to that. They're not going to go through another bungled effort again, so they gave in to that and released them back to them. And then you move on to 1977, when you get another Palestinian terrorist group who are looking to hijack another plane to demand yet more Palestinians are freed from jail in Israel. Obviously, they choose another German airline because the Lufthansa and German airlines have proved soft in the past. So in 1977, they hijacked another Lufthansa jet, this one here, and through a series of negotiations, they ended up landing at Mogadishu airport, where the German government was going to release the Baader-Meinhof gang and had arranged for refueling and release of Palestinian prisoners. Only this time, GSG-9 had been planning and preparing. They created a diversion on the night of the 17th of October, and then Operation Magic Fire went into action. And it was an absolute, total success. Taking over planes with hostages and terrorists is probably the hardest special forces situation there is. The confined space and all of the people, and the potential for human shields. But in less than 7 minutes, GSG-9 had stormed the plane, had killed 4 out of the 5 terrorists and seriously wounded the other. They only sustained 2 injuries, one to slight injury to an air stewardess and one to their own policeman, and all 86 passengers were unharmed and left the plane. You couldn't get a more outright swift success than that. And that was the announcement that GSG-9 was on the global platform. A terrific effort by them, with no casualties and all hostages free. What makes them it's not just that, I think, that makes them the best special forces unit in the world. It is the fact that in 2005, they won the World SWAT Championships. Yes, there is such a thing. In America, obviously, it's there, obviously. They didn't just win it in 2005, they won every single category. 8 out of 8 they came top in. And in 2006, GSG-9 went back there and defended their title. Undoubtedly, one of the top special forces units in the world. But they're very different to other special forces. They're probably the only national special forces unit that doesn't make its numbers up through the military because of that law that Germany has. They can't be used domestically, the army. So they're made up entirely of policemen. And originally, GSG stood for Grenzschutzgruppe 9, which is Border Guard Group 9. And originally, that's who made up some of the early units. And they just kept the name after reorganization. And I guess it's got some kudos to it now. Since 1973, when they first became active, today, and 2003, they've carried out over 1,500 missions, most of which we don't know about. The most famous one, I think, is the Operation Magic Fire in 1977. So there you are. That's why they're in an international computer game. GSG-9, one of the world's best special forces units, made up entirely of policemen and not soldiers. Remarkable. Moving on to our last event for today, then, I want to talk about this place. Isn't it beautiful? Somewhere in the Caribbean, you think? Nope, I don't think so. Although, I mean, maybe it could be. Yeah. No, this is on the southwest coast of England. This is the Scilly Isles. Not silly as in ridiculous, silly as in SC. So let me just show you on the map where that is. Right off the southern tip there. And I'm going to talk to you about the longest war, one of the longest wars ever. It is a war between the Netherlands and the Scilly Islands. And it went on for 355 years. That is amazing, and never heard of it. Well, how on earth did this happen? The origins of the war begin in the Civil War, the English Civil War, in the 1640s. Parliament defeated the royalist parties and pushed them to the fringes of the country. And the royalist navy, pushed out of England, took refuge in the Scilly Isles and continued to operate from there. And who were they operating against during the Civil War? Well, they were operating against Parliament, but they were also operating against the Dutch Navy, because the Dutch Navy were supporting the parliamentarians. So Parliament and the Dutch Navy on the same side. Here is our Dutch Navy here. So when the war ends, the Royalists had retreated to the Isles of Scilly. In March 1651, the Royalist Navy had surrendered to Parliament at that point. But the Dutch were not particularly happy. You see, they wanted compensation for their damage and loss to their shipping during the Civil War. And when the Civil War had ended, the Royalist Navy had still continued to act out of the Scilly Isles, damaging them. So they had sailed their fleet there, and this guy who was in charge of the Dutch fleet, Martin Tromp, decided that he was going to declare war on the Scilly Islands unless they paid reparations. And so that's what he did. Well, when they surrendered to Parliament in 1651, the Dutch decided they weren't going to get anything. They'd surrendered. And so off the Dutch went home. And nobody realized that they had declared war. Well, that they had not formally ended the war. What happened is that a local historian discovered this in 1986, some 335 years later, that actually, formally, the Scilly Islands and Netherlands were still at war. And in 1986, the Dutch ambassador, Jonker Heidekoper, arrived in the Scilly Islands to formally sign a cessation of combat and a peace treaty. And rather wonderfully said to them, Scillians, that's what you're called if you're from the Scilly Islands, Scillians can rest easy in their beds now. It must have been a great worry for them to know that the Dutch could have invaded without warning at any moment. And there you have it. Today, in 1986, ended possibly one of the longest wars ever, the Dutch versus Scilly Islands War, 335 years with no casualty. That is your lot today. That's the end of September. September? Stop presenting. I thought I stopped recording. Whew. That's the end of the 17th of April in history today. I'll see you tomorrow for the 18th of April. I hope you enjoyed that. Ta-da!